The medicine bottle slipped from Jake's trembling hands, clattering across the pharmacy floor. Empty, just like his wallet. "I'm sorry, but without payment, I can't give you the prescription," the pharmacist said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake's heart pounded. His grandmother needed this medicine. Tonight. He looked at the price tag again. $200. Might as well be $2,000. The glass doors of Park's phone repair shop chimed as Jake rushed back inside, his mind racing. 3 hours left in his shift. Maybe someone would bring in an expensive repair job. Maybe a miracle would happen. That's when the black Mercedes pulled up outside. Richard Sterling stepped out, his $3,000 suit catching the afternoon light. Everything about him screamed money, from his gold watch to his perfectly styled hair. He didn't walk into the shop, he commanded it. "Where's the owner?" Sterling's voice boomed across the small space. "Mr. Park is at lunch, sir. I can help you," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. Sterling's eyes swept over Jake with disgust. The torn jeans, the faded t-shirt, the desperate look of someone who needed every dollar. "I don't think so, kid. I need someone who actually knows what they're doing." Sterling slammed his phone on the counter. The latest model, encased in what looked like real gold. The screen was completely shattered, spiderweb cracks spreading across the surface. "This phone contains information worth millions. If some amateur messes it up, I'll sue this place into the ground." Jake's hand shook as he picked up the device. $200 for a screen replacement. Exactly what he needed for his grandmother's medicine. "I can fix this, sir. I've been doing phone repairs for 2 years. I know this model inside and out." Sterling laughed, but there was no humor in it. You look like you can barely afford your own phone. What makes you think you can handle mine?" The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He thought about his grandmother, probably sitting at home right now, wondering why her medicine was taking so long. He thought about his father, who died working construction just to put food on their table. He thought about every rich person who had ever looked at him like he was nothing. "Because I have to," Jake said, quietly. Something flickered in Sterling's eyes, maybe surprise, maybe respect, but it was gone in an instant. "Fine, but if you break it, you'll pay for it. And trust me, kid, you can't afford what this phone is worth." Sterling threw down a business card. "Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Tech. Fix it fast. I have a board meeting in 2 hours." As Sterling walked out, Jake stared at the broken phone in his hands. He had no idea that inside this device was a secret that would change everything. A photo that would make the powerful man who just threatened him faint with terror. A photo that would reveal the truth about Jake's father's death. The truth that Richard Sterling had been hiding for 3 years. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and let's dive into this story of justice, secrets, and how one broken phone changed everything. Jake Martinez had learned early that life wasn't fair. At 17, while other kids worried about prom dates and college applications, he spent his afternoons fixing cracked screens and water-damaged phones. Every dollar he earned went toward keeping his small family afloat. The apartment where Jake lived with his grandmother Maria was tiny. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, and a heater that only worked when you hit it just right. But it was home. The walls were covered with photos of happier times. His father in his construction uniform, smiling and strong. His mother holding baby Jake, before she decided that poverty was too hard and left them behind. "Mijo, you don't have to work so hard," Maria would tell him every morning, her voice weak from the illness that was slowly stealing her strength. But Jake did have to work hard. Someone had to pay for her medicine, for food, for the rent that kept going up every year. His father had died in a construction accident when Jake was 14. The company said it was an equipment failure. Case closed. No one to blame.
No compensation for the family left behind. Jake remembered that day clearly. The knock on the door, the police officer with sad eyes, the way his whole world crumbled in an instant. "I'm sorry for your loss," the officer had said. "These things happen in construction, very dangerous work." But Jake's father had been careful. He always wore his safety gear. He followed every rule. The accident never made sense, but who was going to listen to a poor family asking questions? That's when Jake learned his first lesson about how the world really worked. Rich people had lawyers. Poor people had sympathy cards and empty promises. 3 years later, Jake had gotten good at fixing things. Not just phones and tablets, but finding ways to make broken situations work. He figured out how to make cheap parts last longer. He became an expert at making do with less. Mr. Park, the shop owner, had become like a father to him. The older Korean man had immigrated to America with nothing but a dream and a toolbox. He understood what it meant to work for every opportunity. "Jake, you have good hands," Mr. Park would say, watching him work. "But more important, you have good heart. That's what makes the difference." The phone repair shop was Jake's sanctuary. Between the shelves of replacement parts and the smell of electrical circuits, he felt useful. Customers brought him their broken devices, and he made them whole again. If only fixing his own life was that simple. Meanwhile, across town in a glass tower that scraped the sky, Richard Sterling was building his empire. Sterling Tech had started as a small construction company 20 years ago. Now it was a billion-dollar corporation with projects all over the city. Sterling's office occupied the entire top floor of the Sterling Tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city below, a city he was reshaping one building at a time. His desk was made from imported marble. His chair cost more than most people made in a month. But for all his wealth, Richard Sterling was not a happy man. He was angry. Angry at a world that questioned his methods. Angry at competitors who called him ruthless. Angry at employees who weren't grateful enough for the jobs he provided. "Emma, get the city planning department on the phone," Sterling barked at his assistant one morning. "These permit delays are costing me money." Emma Chen had worked for Sterling for 3 years. She had seen him destroy careers with a single phone call. She had watched him crush smaller companies just because he could. She stayed because the pay was good and jobs were hard to find. But every day she went home feeling a little more hollow inside. "Mr. Sterling, they said the safety inspections need to be completed first." "Safety inspections are for weak companies. We've never had a serious accident." Emma's computer screen showed a different story. There had been accidents, workers injured, equipment failures, but somehow the reports always disappeared. The witnesses always changed their stories. The families always settled quietly. Sterling had built his fortune on a foundation of shortcuts and cover-ups. He knew which inspectors could be bought, which officials would look the other way, which lawyers could make problems disappear. In his penthouse apartment, Sterling lived surrounded by expensive art and empty rooms. He had no real friends, only business associates. No family, only employees. He had everything money could buy, but nothing that actually mattered. The photo on his phone, the one that would soon change everything, was buried deep in an encrypted folder. It showed him at a construction site 3 years ago, standing next to equipment that should have been replaced months earlier, shaking hands with the supervisor who had assured him that cutting corners would save millions. The same construction site where Jake's father had died. Sterling had taken the photo as insurance, proof that he wasn't the only responsible if anything went wrong. But when the accident happened, he had panicked. The phone with the incriminating evidence was too dangerous to keep around, but too valuable to destroy. So he had hidden it, encrypted it, convinced himself that no one would ever find it. He was wrong. Back in the small apartment, Maria Martinez sat in her worn armchair, looking at an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Construction worker dies in equipment failure." Below it was a photo of her son, Jake's father, smiling in his work uniform. Maria had get a housekeeper for wealthy families most for life. She had cleaned their houses, raised their children, and kept their secrets. She knew how rich people really lived. She knew what they were capable of. The day her son died, Maria had been working at the Sterling mansion. She had overheard phone calls, seen documents left carelessly on desks, witnessed the panic in Sterling's voice as he made call after call to lawyers and politicians. But what could she do? She was just a housekeeper. Who would believe her word against a millionaire? So she stayed quiet, took care of her grandson, tried to forget what she had seen and heard. But the truth has a way of surfacing, especially when someone with good hands and a good heart is determined to fix what's broken. As Jake worked on Sterling's phone that afternoon, he had no idea that he was about to uncover the secret that would finally bring justice to his family. He didn't know that the arrogant man who had just insulted him was responsible for his father's death. All he knew was that his grandmother needed medicine, and fixing this phone was his only way to get it. Sometimes the most important repairs happen when we're not even trying to fix anything at all.
The phone was more damaged than Jake had initially thought. The impact had cracked not just the screen, but damaged the internal components. As he carefully removed the back panel, he noticed something odd. This wasn't a standard phone. It had been modified with additional security features. "This is going to take longer than I thought," Jake muttered, reaching for his specialized tools. Outside, Sterling paced back and forth on the sidewalk, checking his watch every few minutes. The board meeting was in 90 minutes. He needed that phone back. More importantly, he needed to make sure the kid hadn't accessed anything he shouldn't have. Emma Chan had driven Sterling to the repair shop and was now watching her boss's growing anxiety with interest. In 3 years of working for him, she had never seen him this nervous about a simple phone repair. "Mr. Sterling, maybe we should just buy you a new phone," she suggested. "No!" Sterling's response was too quick, too sharp. "I need that specific phone. The data on it is irreplaceable." Emma raised an eyebrow. She knew Sterling backed up everything to the cloud. What could be so special about this one device? Inside the shop, Jake was making progress. He had replaced the screen and was now running diagnostics on the internal systems. The phone was starting to respond, but there was something wrong with the memory allocation. Files were fragmented, scattered across the device in an unusual pattern. "That's weird," Jake said to himself, scrolling through the system architecture. "It's like someone tried to hide something really deep in the code." His repair software was detecting encrypted folders that weren't showing up in the normal file structure. Professional curiosity got the better of him. Jake had always been fascinated by digital security, teaching himself about encryption and data recovery in his spare time. "Just a quick look," he told himself. "Need to make sure everything's working properly." What Jake didn't know was that Sterling's phone had been designed by a paranoid man who trusted no one. The encryption was military grade, but it had a flaw. When the phone was severely damaged, the security protocols sometimes reset to default settings. As Jake's recovery software probed deeper, it began to unlock folders that had been sealed for years. Hidden photos, encrypted documents, audio recordings that Sterling had made as insurance against his business partners. Sterling's pacing outside became more frantic. He kept glancing through the window at Jake, who was hunched over his workbench, completely absorbed in his task. "How long does it take to fix a screen?" Sterling demanded, bursting back into the shop. "Almost done, sir. But I found some corrupted files that I need to repair. Don't want you to lose any important data." Sterling's face went pale. "What kind of files?" "Photos, mostly. Some are pretty damaged, but I can probably recover them." "No." Sterling's voice was sharp. "Don't recover anything. Just fix the screen and give it back." Jake looked up, confused. "But sir, you said the information was worth millions. I thought you'd want me to save everything possible." "I changed my mind.
Emma watched this exchange with growing suspicion. Sterling was sweating now, despite the air conditioning. His hands were shaking slightly, something she'd never seen before. Jake turned back to his work. "Too late, sir. The recovery process is already running. Should be finished in about 10 minutes. Sterling felt his world starting to collapse. 3 years of careful planning, 3 years of buried secrets, and it was all going to be destroyed by some teenager in a repair shop. "I'll pay you double to stop right now," Sterling said desperately. "Double?" Jake's hands froze over the keyboard. That would be $400, more than enough for his grandmother's medicine, with money left over for food. But something in Sterling's voice made Jake pause. This wasn't just about money. This man was terrified of what might be on his own phone. "What are you so afraid of?" Jake asked quietly. Sterling's mask slipped for just a moment. In that instant, Jake saw something that shocked him. Guilt. Deep, terrible guilt that had been eating at this man for years. "Please, you don't understand. Some things are better left buried." Jake looked at his computer screen. The recovery process was 90% complete. In a few minutes, he would see whatever Richard Sterling was so desperate to hide. Outside, storm clouds were gathering. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the repair shop. Jake had no idea that he was about to uncover the truth that would change everything. The truth about his father's death, the truth about the powerful man standing in front of him, the truth that would finally bring justice to his family. The computer beeped. Recovery complete.
Jake's finger hovered over the mouse. The recovered files were displayed on his screen. Dozens of photos, documents, and audio recordings that had been hidden in the deepest layers of Sterling's phone. "Don't," Sterling said, his voice barely a whisper. "Please, I'll give you anything." But Jake was already clicking. The first photo opened, and his world stopped. It was a construction site. The same construction site where his father had died. Jake recognized it immediately. He had visited the memorial they built there every year on the anniversary of the accident. In the photo, Richard Sterling stood next to a piece of heavy machinery, the same machine that had malfunctioned and killed Jake's father. But in this photo, the machine was clearly damaged, rusted, held together with temporary repairs that were never meant to last. Sterling was shaking hands with a man in a hard hat. Both men were smiling. In the background, Jake could see workers, including his father, completely unaware of the danger they were in. "This was taken the day before the accident," Jake said, his voice hollow. Sterling said nothing. He couldn't. The truth was finally out. Jake clicked on another photo. This one showed a document, a safety inspection report. The official report had said the equipment was in good condition, but this photo showed the real report, the one that had been buried. It recommended immediate replacement of the machinery, warning that continued use could result in, quote, catastrophic failure and potential loss of life. Sterling's signature was at the bottom, with a handwritten note, "Too expensive. Continue operations." Jake's hands were shaking now. He clicked on an audio file. Sterling's voice filled the small repair shop. "I don't care what the safety report says. We're behind schedule and over budget. That machine works well enough. A few more months won't hurt anyone." Another voice responded, "But Mr. Sterling, if someone gets hurt, then we'll deal with it when it happens. Right now, I need to save money." Jake stopped the recording. He couldn't listen to any more. This man, this wealthy, powerful man, had knowingly sent his father to his death to save money. "You killed him," Jake said quietly. Sterling finally found his voice. "It was an accident. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. You knew the machine was dangerous. You had the report. You could have fixed it, but you chose not to. You don't understand business," Sterling said desperately. "These decisions are complicated. There are shareholders to consider, budgets to meet." "My father had a family to consider," Jake's voice cracked. "He had a son who needed him, a mother who loved him, but you decided your money was more important than his life." Emma Chen stood frozen in the doorway.
She had heard everything. 3 years of working for Sterling, and she had never known the full extent of his crimes. Jake clicked on another file. This one showed a series of text messages between Sterling and his lawyers in the days after the accident. Need this buried deep, whatever it costs. Witnesses can be convinced to change their stories. Family will take settlement. No settlement. Too suspicious. Make it look like standard equipment failure. What about the safety report? Already destroyed. Official story is the equipment was properly maintained. Jake read each message out loud, his voice growing stronger with each revelation. Years of poverty, years of struggling, years of believing his father's death was just bad luck. All of it had been a lie. You covered it up, Jake said. You destroyed evidence. You bribed officials. You let my family suffer while you got richer. Sterling was backed against the wall now, literally and figuratively. I can make this right. I can give you money, a lot of money, enough to take care of your grandmother, to go to college, to have a good life. You think this is about money? Jake's voice was ice cold. You think you can buy your way out of what you did? Everyone has a price. Not everyone. Jake picked up his phone and started dialing. I'm calling the police. Wait, Sterling lunged forward, but Emma stepped between them. Don't, she said to her boss. You've done enough damage. Sterling turned to her, shocked. Emma, you work for me. You signed confidentiality agreements. I signed agreements to keep business secrets, not to cover up murder. It wasn't murder. It was an accident. It was murder, Jake said, his finger still hovering over the call button. At that moment, the door chimed again. Mr. Park walked in, back from his lunch break. He took one look at the scene, Jake crying over his computer, Sterling pressed against the wall, Emma standing between them, and immediately understood something serious was happening. Jake, what's wrong? Mr. Park, Jake said, his voice breaking, I found out who killed my father. Mr. Park's eyes widened. He had known Jake's family for years. He had been at the funeral. He had watched this boy struggle to survive after losing everything. Show me, Mr. Park said simply. Jake turned the computer screen toward him. The photos, the documents, the audio recordings, all of it was there. 3 years of hidden truth, finally brought to light. Mr. Park studied the evidence carefully. As a business owner, he understood the weight of what he was seeing. This wasn't just negligence. This was deliberate, calculated murder disguised as an accident. You are Richard Sterling, Mr. Park said, looking at the man cowering in the corner of his shop. Sterling nodded weakly. You killed this boy's father to save money. I didn't mean for it to happen. But you knew it would happen. You chose money over human life. Sterling had no answer. There was no answer. The truth was simple and terrible. He had valued his profit more than human life, and a good man had died because of it. Call the police, Mr. Park said to Jake. Call them now. As Jake dialed 911, Sterling made one last desperate attempt to escape. He ran toward the door, but Emma blocked his path. No, she said firmly. You're going to stay here and face what you've done. You're fired, Sterling snarled. Good, I should have quit years ago. The police arrived within minutes. Jake handed over the phone with its devastating evidence. Sterling was arrested on charges of negligent homicide, obstruction of justice, and bribery of public officials. As the handcuffs clicked around Sterling's waists, he looked at Jake one last time. I'm sorry, he whispered. Jake met his eyes. Sorry doesn't bring my father back. Sorry doesn't give me back 3 years of thinking his death was my fault for not being able to save him. Sorry doesn't heal my family. Sterling was led away in the police car, his empire about to crumble around him. The photos Jake had recovered would be headline news within hours. Sterling tech stock would crash. The board would demand answers. Lawsuits would follow. Jake sat in the quiet repair shop, staring at the phone that had changed everything. His hands were steady now. The truth was out. Justice was finally coming. But more than that, he finally understood that his father's death hadn't been his fault. It hadn't been bad luck or an unavoidable accident. It had been a crime, and now the criminal would pay. "Are you okay?" Emma asked softly. Jake looked at her, this woman who had stood up to her powerful boss, who had chosen to do the right thing even when it cost her everything. "I think I will be," he said. "For the first time in 3 years, I think I will be."
The news broke that evening. Sterling Tech CEO arrested in cover-up of worker's death. The story spread across social media like wildfire. Jake's recovered evidence was front-page news in every major newspaper. Within hours, Sterling Tech's stock price crashed. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Investors demanded answers. Other families who had lost loved ones in Sterling's construction projects started coming forward with their own stories. Jake's small apartment became the center of a media storm. Reporters wanted to interview the teenager who had brought down one of the city's most powerful men. But Jake wasn't interested in fame. He just wanted justice for his father. "No interviews," he told the reporters gathered outside his building. "My family needs privacy right now." The legal proceedings moved quickly. With the evidence Jake had recovered, Sterling's guilt was undeniable. The audio recordings, the photos, the text messages, they painted a clear picture of a man who had knowingly endangered lives to protect his profits. Sterling's lawyers tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the district attorney wasn't interested. This case was too important, too public. Sterling would face trial for his crimes. Emma Chen became a key witness in the prosecution. She had kept copies of documents, recorded conversations, and witnessed Sterling's pattern of putting profits before safety. Her testimony would be crucial in proving that the cover-up went beyond one tragic accident. "I should have spoken up years ago," Emmett told Jake when they met at the courthouse. "I saw what he was doing, and I stayed silent. I'm sorry." "You're speaking up now. That's what matters." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Jake testified about finding the evidence, about the years his family had suffered, believing the accident was just bad luck. Maria, his grandmother, testified about what she had overheard while working at the Sterling mansion. Other families testified too. The construction worker who had been injured in another accident at a Sterling site. The widow whose husband had died when unsafe scaffolding collapsed. The pattern was clear. Sterling had built his fortune on the graves of working people. Sterling's defense team tried to argue that he was just a businessman making difficult decisions, that the accidents were unforeseeable. But Jake's evidence proved otherwise. Sterling had been warned repeatedly about safety issues and had chosen to ignore them. The jury took less than 4 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Sterling was sentenced to 25 years in prison. His personal fortune was seized to pay compensation to the families of his victims. Sterling Tech was placed under federal oversight with new safety regulations that would prevent similar tragedies. Jake used his family's compensation to pay for his grandmother's medical care and to set up a scholarship fund for children who had lost parents in workplace accidents. He didn't want to profit from his father's death, but he could honor his memory by helping others. The phone repair shop became busier than ever. People came not just to fix their devices, but to meet the young man who had stood up to a powerful corporation and won. Mr. Park had to hire 2 additional employees to handle the increased business. "You did good thing," Mr. Park told Jake one afternoon as they worked side by side. "Your father would be proud." Emma Chen started her own business, a consulting firm that helped companies implement real safety protocols. She used her insider knowledge of how corporations cut corners to help prevent future tragedies. "I can't undo what I was part of, but I can make sure it doesn't happen again," she told Jake. Sterling's former mansion was sold to pay his victims' families. The new owners turned it into a community center, offering after-school programs for children from low-income families. Jake's father's name was engraved on a plaque by the front door.
Maria's health improved once she was able to afford proper medical care. More importantly, the secret she had carried for 3 years was finally out. She no longer had to live with the guilt of knowing the truth and staying silent. "I'm proud of you, mijo," she told Jake one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. "You did what I was too scared to do. We did it together, Grandma, all of us." The broader impact of Sterling's conviction was felt throughout the construction industry. New safety regulations were implemented. Whistleblower protections were strengthened. Workers' rights groups used Sterling's case as an example of why corporate accountability mattered. But for Jake, the most important change was personal. He no longer blamed himself for his father's death. He no longer carried the weight of thinking he should have somehow prevented it. He understood now that his father had died because of one man's greed, not because of any failing on Jake's part. 6 months after Sterling's conviction, Jake graduated from high school. He had been accepted to several colleges with scholarships that would cover his full tuition. He planned to study engineering, inspired by his father's love of building things. At graduation, Jake's empty chair, the one they had saved for his father, was filled by Mr. Park, Emma Chen, and several other people who had become his chosen family. The community that had formed around seeking justice for his father had become something permanent and precious. Sterling, meanwhile, sat in a prison cell, finally understanding the full weight of what he had done. The luxury he had surrounded himself with was gone. The power he had wielded was broken. He had nothing left but the consequences of his choices. Some nights he dreamed about the families he had destroyed. He saw Jake's father, laughing and working, unaware that his life was about to end because of a decision made in a boardroom. He saw Jake as a 14-year-old boy, learning that his father would never come home. In prison, Sterling met other inmates who had lost family members to corporate negligence. They told him their stories: children who had died from contaminated water, workers who had been exposed to dangerous chemicals, families who had lost everything while executives got rich. For the first time in his life, Sterling began to understand the human cost of his actions, not just the statistics and legal liability, but the real people who had suffered because of his choices. He started writing letters to Jake's family, trying to apologize, trying to explain. But Jake never read them. Some wounds couldn't be healed with words, and some forgiveness couldn't be asked for. The broken phone that had started it all was kept as evidence until the trial ended. Afterward, it was donated to a museum exhibit about corporate accountability and the power of technology to expose truth.
Jake never fixed another phone quite the same way. Every device he worked on reminded him that sometimes the most important repair work happens not to the technology, but to the world around it.
2 years later, Jake stood in the engineering lab at State University, working on a project that would improve safety sensors for construction equipment. His textbooks were paid for with scholarship money. His dorm room was small but comfortable. His grandmother's medical bills were covered by the settlement from Sterling's estate. But the real change wasn't in Jake's circumstances. It was in his understanding of himself and his place in the world. He had learned that justice wasn't something that happened to you. It was something you fought for. Sometimes it came from unexpected places, like a broken phone and a teenager who knew how to fix things. The phone repair shop still displayed a small plaque in memory of all workers who died because someone else chose profit over safety. Customers often asked about its meaning, and Mr. Park would tell them Jake's story. Sometimes, he would say, the most broken things are the ones that need fixing most. Jake visited his father's grave every month. He would tell him about school, about his plans to become an engineer, about the scholarship fund that was helping other kids whose parents had died in workplace accidents. "I fixed it, Dad. I fixed the broken thing that took you away from us." Sterling remained in prison, serving his sentence. Some of his former employees visited him not to forgive, but to show him the human faces behind his corporate decisions. He aged quickly behind bars, his empire forgotten, his wealth gone.
But Jake's story lived on. It was told in schools and community centers, in worker safety seminars and corporate ethics classes. It became a reminder that truth has a way of surfacing, that justice is possible, and that sometimes the most powerful people in the world can be brought down by someone who simply refuses to let injustice stand. The broken phone had been fixed. But more importantly, a broken system had been exposed, a broken family had found healing, and a broken world had been made a little more just. Jake learned that fixing things wasn't just about replacing broken parts, it was about understanding how things worked, why they broke, and how to make them better than they were before. He had started as a poor boy who fixed phones. He had become a young man who fixed injustice. And in the end, that made all the difference. The lesson wasn't that good always triumphs over evil, or that justice always prevails. The lesson was simpler and more powerful, that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they choose to use it, that truth, once revealed, cannot be hidden again, and that sometimes the most important repairs happen not to devices, but to the world itself. Jake's father would have been proud, not just of his son's success, but of his character, of his refusal to let his father's death be meaningless, of his determination to turn tragedy into purpose. The phone was fixed, the family was healed, and justice, finally, was served. In the end, that what mattered most.